Thank you. I'm so happy to be here today, and thanks to Deborah, Manuela, Kimberly, and Bryn for putting this together. I know the amount of labor in making this event happen. It was significant. I'm really grateful for it. And about that wad of cash so that the story doesn't spin out of control. I wrote that blog post because I'd been invited to give a presentation at a conference that was both scholars and creative writers. And creative writers are another world to me. I didn't know this, but creative writers actually get a per diem when they present at a conference. And they decided that the scholars should get one too. So at a certain point in the conference, somebody just gave me an envelope stuffed with $10 bills. But it seemed like a huge amount of money, and that's why I wrote about it, because no one gives scholars money. Okay. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some work of mine that's in progress, and I'm very eager for your feedback on it. So, Posthuman Environs. Sovereign is he who declares the Anthropocene. Carbon embedded in stone is our newest mode of autobiography, the latest means through which we fashion an ode to our having been on Earth. We have crafted the word Anthropocene to name the geological record of our domination over time and matter, to demarcate an era profoundly altered through our activity. But the term also conveys the human love of making things with rocks and with words. We imbue stone and language with meaning. Both thereby become signifiers in the grandiloquent stories we tell about ourselves. Yet, what if neither word nor world is so passive? What if language is an ecological interface resounding with non-human activity? What if rock refuses the stillness of being rendered a recording device, and makes its own impress, exerts its own force? Serenella Jovino and Serpil Opperman write that all matter is storied, in their words, a material mesh of meanings, properties, and processes in which human and non-human players are interlocked in networks that produce undeniable signifying forces. Matter is rich in inhuman agency and ceaselessly productive of narrative. Let's push this insight farther and wonder, might environmental impress enter word as well as plot? Might storied matter pulse in fundamental units, nouns, verbs, morphemes? What if the non-human leaves lingering presences deep within our linguistic archives, traces that never become inert? Might matter be inscribing us, rendering humans the record of a disanthropocene that unfolds regardless of what epochs we declare? As far as stories go, the Anthropocene is not all that well plotted. Our melancholic exultation in having become geological comes from imagining the human as unified, as solitary, an incorporeal force powerful enough to imprint rock. Yet to universalize and abstract the human is to reinscribe a historically specific vision that declares itself unbeholden to time and place, to the misery of those who find themselves on the margins of the white, European, masculine entity. Humanness gets unevenly distributed, and for really complex meditations on that, see the work of my fellow co-keynotes, Stefan Herberchter, Margaret Childrett, Carrie Wolf. I've written extensively on the topic. And as Stacy Alimo has shown, the typical Anthropocene narrative of men and rocks neglects the creatures and things obliterated as we herald this epoch of our own making, an era in which the seas are acidifying and becoming desolate. To figure humanity as a disembodied force is to forget the lessons of feminism, environmental justice, and posthumanism, and thereby to fail to consider the unevenly distributed violence, swift and slow, that climate change engenders. We are corporeal beings within a shared world that at every level exceeds us. Offering a counter-narrative to our lonely geological tales, stories that arrive from posthuman environs disperse without disembodying, a change of climate for thinking ecological terms. Catastrophe's archive brims with narratives that unfold along timescales far exceeding the familiar, long arcs of impress and translation, generation, and grapple. These tales are often glimpsed through etymology, the geology of language. We inherit in the strata of our words histories of composition and companionship that exceed the human, an epical poesis. Although it will become in English the word poetry, poesis in classical Greek is quite simply a making, is when humans build a boat and climb aboard with animal companions to weather a flood, or when a rock or a pig enters water and the sound ripples into a word, swash, slosh, plash. I'm especially interested today in an intensely ecological form of poesis with disanthropocentric force, onomatopoeia. Literally a name-making, onomatopoeia is a movement into language of environmental resonance. The material world has always imprinted itself upon us, with us, and despite us. If we tarry for a moment over longer histories, we might recognize they already inhabit us, sometimes as narratives, sometimes in strangely communicative sounds that intermix matter and meaning. Language sometimes carries within its sonority non-human presence and force. Although typically associated with animal noise, onomatopoeia is the transport of hissing wind, rumbling stone, and crackling fire, a veering of language into posthuman environs. To explore this noisy possibility, I follow some onomatopoeic words that transport beyond a singular Anthropocene, that suggest a path out of its hubris without losing sight of the specific violences that unfold along its fraught terrain. These words amplify and convey the elemental and the animal, no matter how imprecisely, no matter how mediated the form in which they arrive. Human collaboration with the non-human, onomatopoeia allies affective and material intensities. My three echosonorous terms for posthuman environs are tsupu, wolf, and fnortith. So tsupu, or the world is wide. Although you are likely never to have heard the lowland Ecuadorian Quechua word tsupu, according to the anthropologist Eduardo Cohen, when I tell you what the term conveys, your reaction should be, in his words, a sudden feel for its meaning, a recognition that its sound materially communicates. So here goes. Tsupu designates an entity as it makes contact with and then penetrates a body of water. Tsupu is the sonorous ripple into language of slap and swash, linguistic propulsion of the meeting of water and falling body. Cohen illustrates the words signifying ambit with two examples. This is to quote his definition of tsupu. A big stone heaved into a pond, or the compact mass of a wounded peccary plunging into a river's pool. Tsupu, something slips into water. Does that word feel wet, like spray from a rippled spring, the splash of a pig in a pond? Does tsupu echo in your ears and cling to your skin? Does it plosh into cognition, like pebble or peccary, into liquid depths? Building upon the material semiology of Charles Peirce, Cohen argues in his book, How Forests Think, this is the book I've been quoting from, that iconic words like tsupu carry a palpable impress of thing and event. As sonic images, they don't represent, they represent what they designate. Like Peirce before him, Cohen discerns a power in onomatopoeia that critics of a more post-structuralist bent have often denied. Because we want language to be onomatopoeic, Hugh Broden very influentially argued, we imagine that we hear within some words sounds that suggest movement or event, but signification remains conventional. Yet Cohen does not argue that iconic or onomatopoeic words are not highly mediated, nor would he side with Plato's Credulus to argue that language arose through finding the right sound for the right object, as if early human words had natural affinities to the things they designated. Signification has always been arbitrary. Cohen insists, however, that iconic words signify differently from others, forcefully conveying the phenomenon for which they stand, bearing resonant traces of the non-human world. In Cohen's example, a rock or an animal tumbling into water pearls into a word that somehow feels like a pig plunging, capturing as well as conveying the greater-than-human communicative web within which its action unfolds. A monkey may as easily as a human recognize that this sudden splash signals the nearing of danger or opportunity. Tsupu relays shared worldedness, a forest lost in thought, word and pig as transport devices that disperse signals, receptions, and reactions across the wood-wide web. Humans are only one of the nodes in this meaning-making assemblage, this acoustic machine for communal cognition. Cohen glosses tsupu as any entity entering water, the movement of rock or pig. Stone slips into the river and vanishes, surfacing again only to be excluded from what Cohen calls the ecology of selves. Plants and animals possess an animacy that can alter human perspectives and disrupt the equation of being with being human. Rocks possess no such power, Cohen writes, and therefore cannot participate in how a forest thinks. A capacious category for Cohen, life in a rainforest includes humans, dogs, jaguars, fish, birds, ghosts, trees. His ecology of selves emerges as and through possibilities barred to stone. In Cohen's estimation, the best inorganic matter can accomplish is to impede. And despite Jane Bennett's insistence to the contrary, Cohen writes, resistance is not the same as agency, nor does materiality in and of itself confer vitality. He's wrong, of course. Recalcitrance is a kind of doing and accomplishes things, and it's also perspectival. The rock that is to a human an impediment may be to a tree an essential ally, an anchor to embrace against the wash of a stream. Nor should every scale of being remain implicitly human, so that actors are recognized only when they possess a size or a tempo easily perceived. Jamie Lorimer has listed as eco-critical challenges to human perspectival bias the idea of supraorganisms, systems where humans and animals form part of larger organisms, and the microbiome, and the mineral foundations of all life, and the ways in which the bio and the geo are entangled through interdependent webs of biochemical exchange. And that's from his book, Wildlife in the Anthropocene. It's actually a really good rethinking of scale and how that matters. Within its native temporality, the geological is just as restless as the arboreal. To stone belongs a fleeting archive, continually reconstituted, generating knots of matter and mattering. Rosie Braidotti has argued eloquently for a post-anthropocentric posthumanism that attends to the possible ethics of a world in which familiar ontologies fail to hold. The project of posthumanism is to attend to animal, water, stone, forest, and world, and not to deny force, emergence, or thriving to any of these entities, all of which act, all of which are story-producing. Attentiveness to non-organic things like rocks, wind, water, and fire is not easy to cultivate. Unlike peccaries or plants, they're too fast, slow, vast, minute. Their pressing upon human feeling, thinking, speaking, and narrating, however, remains heavy, even when unseen. Tsupu is the plunge of rock into water, into language, into thought, the coming into story of companionships we deny when we declare the solitary Anthropocene. Posthuman environs offer a wide world that excludes little. Eco-theorists are fond of pointing out that the oikos in ecology is the Greek word for house. This noisy home swings its doors and windows open, bolt them as we may. A fire blazes in the hearth, and the roof leaks. Hearth, foundation, and lintel are fashioned of stone. A dog wanders in and out, woofing for companionship, barking to announce the human space of a shared and co-created territory. Or perhaps the dog bays at the new risen moon, a story indifferent to feeble human heirs. So, wolf. A posthuman ecology transcends no violence. Follow the noise of the dogs, the hounds in their howls that reverberate into language, the warp and the wolf of shelter and story. To disgrace a neighbor who's given birth to twin sons, a noble woman declares that no one becomes pregnant with 2 children without having had sex with 2 men. Makes sense. Not long thereafter, the woman herself delivers twin girls. This is a story about telling stories and the communities these narratives enable or taint. Her slander having redounded upon her, the new mother contemplates infanticide. A maid offers to bear one of the infants away before the household realizes the double birth. Departing at nightfall, the maid treads a forest, following an unknown road through dark trees. At long last, animal sounds announce the nearness of human settlement. This is how the story goes. Then far off to the right, she heard dogs barking and cocks crowing. She knew she would be able to find a town over there. Quickly she went in the direction of the barking, la noise des chiens. The singing of the roosters and the baying of the dogs lead the maid to a village. She spots a great ash tree that grows before an abbey and places the infant within its protective boughs. A porter discovers the abandoned child the next day and delivers her to fostering by the abbey's nuns, the community that planted the tree many years ago in the hope of future shelter. In honor of the place of her discovery, the baby is christened Frêne, Ash. Thus, the opening of a lay composed by the poet Marie de France in the 12th century. Le Frêne, the name of the poem, or the word that gives its poem many resonances. Le Frêne takes its name from both its heroine and her namesake, a tree that bears no fruit, and yet is ceaselessly productive of shelter for others. The intertwining of the arboreal and the human, Frêne, the woman, is also ceaselessly productive of shelter for others, underscores an ecology that is like the Ecuadorian rainforests described by Eduardo Cohen, always more than human. Dogs, roosters, silk, stories, household, twins, trees, these are all agents through which the plot unfolds. This enmeshment is foregrounded by the shared name of the poem, its heroine, and a tree that seems below regard, but gives the poem its deep structure. Unremarkable, uncultivated, yielding neither fruit nor nuts, the ash nonetheless generates story and sanctuary. Like most words, Frêne is not onomatopoeic, sounding nothing like what a tree does. Signification is arbitrary, but not wholly arbitrary. For in French and English, the tree possesses an etymology that encodes larger relations. Ash, Old English ash, and frêne, from Latin fraxinus, derive separately from words that mean spear, transporting a story about the shape of leaves and the making of tools into these names. Unlike this martial etymology, Le Frêne offers a counter-narrative of ecological tendering, a future forged in the midst of peril. The story enmeshes through the word frêne, a woman nearly murdered as an infant who later finds herself in danger of narrative obliteration. A tree too much taken for granted that reveals itself as fecund in possibilities of shelter, altered trajectories, and compassionate conclusions, and the act of poetry making, the poesis that results in the lay itself. It quietly opens a wide world that intermixes the organic and inorganic into soundscape and ecotone, but without denying the violence that undergirds this enmeshment. Movement is aided by trans-species alliances. The maid who carries the unwanted infant through the woods knows that the baying dogs signal nearness of human settlement. Dogs, not wolves. Intimates, creatures of habitation. Woof, or voff, or bow wow, bounce from buildings to announce a living together that is a general story of humans and hounds, community and commensality. Most languages have an onomatopoeic term for what a dog sounds like, capturing canine communication diversely. How in Arabic, half in Czech,
voff, voff in Icelandic, in Irish, wan, wan in Japanese, in Tagalog. Some languages distinguish the noise of small dogs, yip, or demarcate the purpose and tone of the growl, the yelp, the grrr, or the howl. But every language hears dogs slightly differently. Even if when aggregated, these words betray some uncanny similarities. That wolf may be passed along with such variation emphasizes the differences and heterogeneity within the same animal impress, the inherent imperfection of sonic capture and retransmittal. No matter the language in which the baying of the dog is caught, the sound become word is never exact, never wholly successful or unmediated or completely transparent. Yet something of the animal resonates within the onomatopoetic term. Linguistic devices of capture and conveyance vary, just as there is no singular of the animal, only differences collected into an insufficient category. Derrida's animal word, l'animaux, emphasizes a plurality that resists totalization or synthesis. But what all these renderings of the noise dogs make as they howl have in common is sonic communion embedded in a linguistic archive between dogs and humans, an inscription at the level of word that conveys a shared environmentality. Marie de France uses the verb abeiller to capture this canine resonance. Intimate to our modern word bay, the old French verb is mimetic, an attempt like tsupu to transmit a sonic event from the non-human world by making it vibrate anew. A dog bays and an unwanted child finds sanctuary. It's almost a medieval version of Lassie. Follow the sound of the agitated hound and know their dedication to human community. Or know perhaps that inhabitants comes about at least in part through human-canine relations. As John Haraway has pointed out, domestication is a cross-species affair. The dogs that bark in the night must therefore not be rendered symbols. They don't exist for the maid or for the baby, but acknowledged as fully embodied creatures. Haraway writes, dogs are not an alibi for other themes. Dogs are fleshly, material, semiotic presences. Dogs are not surrogates for theory. They are not just here to think with. They are here to live with. That's from the Companion Species Manifesto. And as Derrida and Marie de France make clear, they are animals here to follow. Not everywhere the animal leads is human or humane. Susan Crane has built upon the work of Haraway and Derrida to elaborate the transcorporeal communication and cooperation upon which hunting in the Middle Ages depended. The aristocratic hunt is a human-hound partnership that contains no room in Crane's formulation for egalitarian thinking about cross-species relations. The hunt declares and consolidates human dominion over animals. Dogs are scolded and whipped into submission, just like servants are scolded and whipped by their aristocratic masters, hierarchy enforced through blows. The medieval aristocratic hunt unites dogs and humans into a machine of violence, the dispensing of bloody death. Tsupu is, after all, in Cohen's example, the noise a wounded peccary makes. The hunting assemblage, as called a cross-species alliance with enforceful domination, is vividly materialized in a book now held in the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., an edition of George Gascoigne's Noble Art of Venery or Hunting, 1575. In the 19th century, the manual's owner rebound the book in stag fur and affixed decorative metal bucks with large antlers. The book is now classed by the skin of the creature that its text instructs readers how to pursue, trap, and dismember. Depending on how you feel about hunting, the Folger book will seem repulsive or beautiful, or most likely both. Hidebound in the product of its practice, the volume is anything but inert. When placed in front of you, its cover offers rough brown fur, impossible not to stroke, a summons to material encounter, a call to touch that arrives too late after the call to still. I'm not convinced that the volume's invitation to touch can be fully captured through humanizing reference to fantasy and a frustrated desire to possess. I've seen the volume in action too many times, have witnessed the community of contact that it engenders. The book makes tangible the violence against animals that is its subject matter and refuses to disentangle its allure from its love of domination. Jesse Oat Taylor has argued that hunting is frequently dismissed as an exercise in hypermasculine domination and sadism in ways that gloss over the affective complexity and even trauma of killing. And Taylor wants us to return with a little more historical astuteness to things that we don't like to think about. Hunting is often entwined in difficult tales of conservation that resist domesticating animals into the cute and cuddly, resist extinguishing, in Taylor's words, something much darker, fraught with terror, resist the impulse to disregard violence and to tame wildness. As an object, the book materially manifests a brutal, beautiful entwining of deer and hunter, not just as trophy, but as complicated narrative. It also offers the possibility of animal communication beyond animal death, the possibility, no matter how unlikely, of endurance and memorialization over ephemeral consumption and final endings. The book wants something more than filing away in the Folger Library vault, wants to be read and stroked, wants to reactivate the historical context from which it has become divorced, to touch with its stories and its matter, its worlds and lives now lost, an effusive ecology of affect and force and blood. Enclosed in an animal become art that remains all the same an animal, the book proffers a hazard, a chance, insistent because of the violence it materializes. Perhaps the book wants to kill again, but maybe the object also activates an alternative story, a tale without so lethal or so final a denouement. Gascoigne's hunting manual closes with 2 leaves containing musical notation for bugle calls. By transmitting set sounds in precise sequences, the bugle instructs a baying pack on their next course of action. Similar hunting treatises, medieval and early modern, also contain hunting cries, like this one for assisting hounds who've gone off track to realize that another dog in the pack has picked up the proper scent. To sa, to ho, to ho. Words break into reverberating syllables, sonic particles that communicate through shape and through force. Aristocratic hunting is an alliance that unites dogs, humans, horses, knives, whips, bugles, books, landscapes, and sonic emissions into a fatal machine. Through horn blasts, the baying of dogs, and the transformation of language into intensities of sound, this assemblage opens a temporary space of intimacy and admixture, a hazardous intermezzo of enmeshed agency, an interspecies alliance that contrasts starkly with its bloody culmination. Not every story that transpires within Posthuman Environs ends well. It is Marie de France insists violence that unfolds within more than human ecosystems deserves the same scrutiny as the happy endings that sometimes occur. Perhaps stories are best read without regard to their endings, since closure is always provisional, a shifting of attention rather than a true cessation. That the interminglings of the hunt and action should be limned by and culminate in animal brutality underscores that human identity is typically asserted at the expense of other creatures, even when they are companions. Carl Steele writes that human domination of what it calls animals is sustained through the exertion of force, and force is what separates the categories to begin with. Yet domination seldom fully silences. Tobias Menley has recently focused on sensibility as a way to move discussion of animal presence away from linguistic constructivism and the symbolic order, focusing instead on, and these are Tobias's words, an unintegrated origin and never fully actualized surplus of meaning conveyed by the impassioned voice of human or animal, a voice that resonates even when vocal and bodily expression finds itself captured into text, story, or print. This creaturely community, Menley argues, is best captured by poetry, which creates, in his words, a common world out of the shared experience of corporeal finiteness. Menley's work is a needed corrective to the post-structuralist tendency to equate communication with culturally predetermined linguistic signification. Animals and humans alike are responsible to the signs and to the voices of others. Describing children's books that connect animals to their signature vocalizations like woof, meow, and moo, Menley observes that such echolalia ushers young audiences into the symbolic order, the domain of customary meanings. An animal voice that can sound with creaturely affinity, Menley writes, is to be sought elsewhere in vocal and gestural expressions that address the world but do not function linguistically. I wonder, though, if the spoken word of the human and the creaturely voice are not already cohabitating in resonant juvenilia. Do not onomatopoeic terms like meow, neigh, baa, cackle, kerplunk, caw, boom, whippoorwill, trill, chitter, tweet, and woof resound with such affinity while enlarging what we might group within the category creaturely? Posthumanism possesses a deeply utopian bent. Its practitioners sometimes proceed as if the breaching of ontological categories were in itself affirmative or transcendent. Yet violence is omnipresent, part of the world's fabric, the provenance of plants, animals, and materiality itself. Storied matter possesses many genres, including horror. Ethics resides in the choice not to be resigned to this violence, in the choice not to make another copy of the stag fur-bound hunting manual by Gascoigne, and in the choice not to consign that brutal, beautiful volume to the flame or to the vault. The book binds together matter that solicits lingering. Animal capture is noisy conveyance into story and a sonic disruption of the human that no incorporation into language or identity can still. Follow the noise of the dogs, their howls that reverberate into language. Follow too the bugle that blasts and the voice made instrument of sound, not words. Warp and wolf of shelter and story, even when difficult to hear above the violence of its din. To co-inhabit a dog's world means heightening the senses of smell and sound, allowing meager human olfaction and hearing to be overwhelmed and reoriented. A post-human ecology is an interpenetrative cacophony, and not every sound the human mouth emits amounts to language either. Not every human body from which sound escapes is equally marked, valued, or legible. The violence of the hunt, whip, and words are deployed to discipline dogs and servants. A noisy tale inheres here as well. So, fnortith, or the atmosphere is heavy, but the climate might lift. Trouble the boundaries to enmesh the cosmos, but even a post-human ecology remains housebound. Shift as they may, within its walls, all things, even gendered human bodies, might still be rendered commodities for equivalency and exchange, for the transport not just of environmental impress, as if such impress could be neutral, but also of messages not theirs and against their will. Humans differentiate themselves from the world, from other animals, from other humans, by force. The abjected may resist, matter itself may resist, but humans are really good at overpowering. You may think that a post-human environs promises material enmeshment that leads naturally to peaceful coexistence, but then you're simply turning your eyes away from those who suffer so that some privileged few may enjoy their equanimity. For all their utopian futurity, post-human environs carry a heavy atmosphere, histories that cannot be disowned. So one last medieval tale, this one from Geoffrey Chaucer. Ellen and John, two clerks in the north of England studying in Cambridge, lay awake in strange lodgings. Tricked by an unscrupulous miller, the young men have paid to endure a night under his roof, in his very bedroom. They are assailed by sound. From their shared bed, the clerks listen to the drunken family's nocturnal melody, a rooting. as Chaucer describes it, from the miller's wife and daughter, loud enough to be heard a quarter-mile away. The resonant Middle English noun rooting derives from the Old English verb hrooten, a verb that sounds like the action it conveys, snoring, a term likewise originating in onomatopoeia. It's actually really fun. I mean, we're used to the fun game of following animal sounds in other languages, like what does a dog sound like in French? But it's interesting to think that every language, of course, has a term to designate these involuntary sounds human bodies make, like snoring, that tries to capture somehow into a linguistic conveyance, something that's really outside of language. So it's a verb that sounds like the action it conveys, or snoring. And snoring also is an onomatopoeic word. It doesn't really come from anywhere. But it gets worse. This snoring, this noise that thunders from the miller's open mouth, is so intense that only animal comparisons can capture its force. This is what Chaucer writes about the sound of the snore as these two young men are trying to get to sleep. He says of the miller, as a horse, he fnorteth. That's the word he uses for snoring. He snores in his sleep, so it rumbles like a horse through the house. Within slumber and thereby outside of language, humans sound pretty much the same as animals. For the two clerks, sleep is impossible during this sonic barrage. The Reeve's Tale, and this is the story I've been retelling, the Reeve's Tale offers a narrative ecosystem that resounds with dissonant nonverbal signifying, the rooting and fnorting of the family, the way-hey of the escaped horses after the miller secretly unties them so that John and Alan will be forced to spend the night, the whistles and the shouts that the clerks use to call their horses back from the fens where they've been chasing mares. Sound is a vibration that travels through the air and implants itself in the flesh, but its force ripples far beyond merely human things. Sound saturates the atmosphere and renders air heavy with story. In the House of Fame, Chaucer describes sound, of which human speech is only a special type, as air y broken, broken air, a reverberation that moves with violence, as when, and this is Chaucer's comparison, as when you throw a stone into water. Such sonic ripples keep reverberating only to intensify, rendering the atmosphere a dense archive, thunderous with story. With its snores, cries, shouts, pleas, poems, and prayers, the Reeve's Tale is reverberant, a material ecology that foregrounds the penetrability and porousness of bodies through the very air that surrounds them. The miller and his family snore because their bodies are humoral environments out of balance. Medieval people, like classical and early modern people, believe the human body to be a liquid economy of the four humors. So when it gets out of balance, things happen through drinking. Things happen like snoring. Excessive drinking engenders a superfluity of blood, which in turn triggers a profound need for sleep. The slumber that follows drunkenness is restless, though, since an inebriated head is filled with fuminosity, with alcohol-induced fumes that burden the mind. The intoxicated body well illustrates what, in a different context, Tracy Limo has called transcorporeality, the ways in which medieval embodiment is an environmental affair. And this is equally true for humans and animals. The four humors do their work within skin that offers a permeable membrane rather than a barrier to the world. The body is a dynamic liquid ecology easily thrown into crisis. The medieval equivalent to a post-human ecology is this humoral body, an open system that materially enmeshes the gravity of the moon, the impressive place, the agency of matter, the density and humidity of the atmosphere. And such enmeshment holds as true of animals, plants, and stones as humans, and underscores that human embodiment is a specific, gendered, and racialized phenomena rather than an abstract universal. Psychology and subjectivity are substantial, material, a tenuous system easily disrupted by wine or sunshine or snoring. Embodiment happens in place. Fnortith is a vibratory mechanism, the sound of a body transmitting meaning parasitically within language. Alan Montroso, who's here at this conference, has written about the ways in which sound in the form of, for example, a song can work like a parasitic virus. an event inhabiting a sound, a disorder conveyed by a word in motion, ale to snores to action. The problem, though, is that the action that arises in the Reeves tale is all too human, all too masculine, and not at all humane. 2 acts of sexualized revenge culminate the tale, a message sent by the clerks to the miller through the bodies of his wife and 20-year-old daughter. Within this domestic economy, horses, cakes, wheat, sex, blows are exchanged with little regard for the lived consequence. Economy and ecology share an etymology in oikos, the house and its range, signifying the difficulty of movement beyond the merely human. Interpenetrability is subject to constant economic recapture. The tale becomes a disturbing account of what happens when all the world is reduced to an economy of sale, substitution, and revenge, wheat to pie to profits, every ecology transformed into an economy, all matter, even virginity, rendered bendable. No wonder the story ends with screams, blows, and blood. Women's bodies are used by men to send messages to other men. That these women have their own stories is hinted at, but never given much narrative attention. I don't think Marie de France would have liked Geoffrey Chaucer's Reeves tale very much. The world she envisions in Le Frêne shares little with his heavy fabliau atmosphere. Whereas the wheat in the Reeves tale exists only to be ground to flour and rendered a product that may be substitute for other commoditized things, in Le Frêne, the immense ash tree is an anchoring and unsubstitutable presence that intensifies human relation. Marie foregrounds throughout the poem how gender is articulated within a system of entrenched social inequality. She returns repeatedly to the unevenness and heterogeneity of what it means to be an emplaced, embodied human. Peril haunts the space across which female bodies pass, giving the poem an atmosphere of constant hazard. Le Frêne is a story of woman and precarity, the slanderous mother, the good-hearted maid, the endangered infant, the porter's widowed daughter who breastfeeds the foundling, a nunnery built against the world that keeps finding its way within, sisters and mothers metaphorical as well as biological, a concubine, wives who, when they do not realize their power as authors and agents, cause lives to unravel. Le Frêne urges the making of a world with more and better stories, tales that do not succumb to heavy atmosphere, but embrace the shared precariousness of mundane life. Le Frêne burgeons with a dysanthropocene of barking dogs and the bark of trees, of women who carry a vegetal trace, of stories that enmesh the human and the non-human so that neither stands alone. But the poem also attends to the particularities of violence within the human and warns us that when we attempt to transcend the category by declaring the Anthropocene, we do so at the peril of specificities that require a precise accounting. Ethics inheres in the choice not to universalize, not to ignore the differences that found the category human and that have not been left behind in the post-human. I think Margaret and Carrie are both really good about writing about how ethics demands at once welcome, but also a certain pragmatism too. Limits are built into things that are necessarily capacious. So, tsupu, be, fnortith. In these onomatopoeic terms may be discerned inhuman resonance, posthuman environs. A wounded pig plunges into water and into word. A stone plunges into water and into word. Dogs howl the nearness of shelter, wolf the story of how they enable human habitation. A tree entwines itself with the fostering of human life, with the creation of poetry. Violence and suffering are unevenly distributed in the human world. Gender matters, so does class and race. The human body is a machine of sonority, as ecological in its signaling as animals and stones. Human bodies are also plural phenomena, universalized at peril. Drawing boundaries and declaring epochs may be necessary, but such systems are fragile and insufficient. They inevitably exclude. The Anthropocene is no doubt real, but so is the dysanthropocene, the impress of posthuman environs upon our very bodies, the resounding of environmental impress within our stories and within our words. Thank you.
So energized by that. You don't need coffee at 10:30, but we have 5 minutes in which we could take a few preliminary questions and then continue the discussion outside. I want to thank you for a presentation as lyrical in its sonorous quality as energizing in its intellectual presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very generous of you to say that. I appreciate it.
The style of delivery just matched so perfectly what you were saying as to give us a performance, a demonstration of what you were saying as you were explaining it.
Well, I think one of the best things that we can do as critics is attend to how our words are working for us and the resonances. And that's how the project started, in trying to think about the resonance of words and what the work that we entrust them to do for us and the ways in which they always exceed that work. I do. I mean, it's interesting to think about, we're in Geneva, Saussure was writing here, I guess one of the things that I'm kind of tired of is the turn against the post-structuralist turn, meaning that there's been a lot of flippant dismissal of, I mean, especially Derrida, I think, where it seems like, there's a gesture of clearing space by saying that post-structuralism went wrong, that they didn't get communication right. And actually, I think if you read people like Derrida very attentively, all of that non-human resonance in language as being inherently non-human is already built into it. So what I'm trying to do is to return to something that I think we've known for a long time, but lost focusing upon, which is to say that yes, of course, signification is arbitrary, and I would never argue that there's some natural affinity between words and worlds, except in that grand gesture, we sometimes lose track of the fact that in some special cases, in fact, there is a kind of material resonant continuity between the environmental world and between the worlds that come out of our mouths. So it is definitely a special case, an especially significant case, but I think it's not one that I think it's one that we should hold on to rather than dismiss. Yeah, so that's a great question, and especially as a medievalist, I'm very much aware of the violence of nationalist philologies that tried to see the ways in which language might be an expression of a kind of racial being, that it's, that language carries within it a certain at-homeness with a land that belongs to the race that spawned it. What I really like, though, about recent work in medieval studies is to show the ways in which that's just garbage. That's a myth, that's a romantic mythology. It has nothing to do with things like medieval theories of embodiment, which would not give that kind of traction at all. I also think that there's a way in which when we become afraid of the dangers of things that have been poisoned because they've been used to purposes that are horrendous. People have lost their lives because of nationalist mythologies. It doesn't mean that we should enter a no-think zone when it comes to these things. And that's why, too, hunting, for example, is completely repugnant to me. I'm a vegetarian. I don't even eat animals. But there was something about it comes from a personal story. There's something about my inability to want to deal with that book once somebody showed it to me that really got me thinking about what happens when we put a certain brake on something and decide, no, push that off to the side. So I think you're absolutely right to bring up that there is an invidious history behind thinking of natural affinities between words and ecology. But that doesn't mean that we should just completely stay away from it. We should keep history in mind. So, yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, that's great. Two things. One is to point out that even when it comes to intention, we humans are not as intentional as we think, right? Very often we realize our intentions only retrospectively. Nobody intended the Anthropocene to happen, and yet we did it. There's a way in which action and intention don't have to be figured together, and I think intentionality can sometimes get in the way. Intentionality it's a complicated thing. Sometimes we produce what we want, and sometimes we have no idea what we want because we're working with so many moving parts at once. And the other is, things like the pathetic fallacy. Again, I feel like the pathetic fallacy is continuously invoked to create a no-think zone. Actually, the pathetic fallacy is true. It's the pathetic truth. That is, that there is a vast continuity between human affect and things like climate, environment, the porousness of the body. Again, you wouldn't want to turn it into the eternal truth of humans, that on every sunny day we're happy, or that people who live in tropical climates are disposed to be happier people, or something along those lines. But to say that there is no relation between the weather and human affect is to remove something from thinking that I think environmentality urges us to think differently. That there's a complicated interface that unfolds there. That atmosphere, I love the word atmosphere because it's the thing that's out there and surrounds us, but also it's a psychological state as well. I guess I'm trying to get at the porousness between material worlds and human worlds a little bit better than some other critics have allowed by drawing that strong demarcation.
Last question. Someone over here had a question.
I have a question has to do with reading in the context of posthumanism. I was wondering if you can say a little bit more about the transition from the restraint of the senses. That some of you were talking about the senses being overwhelmed by the non-human figures, and then you turn towards ethics. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the transition
so education and training seem to me two opposed things, and you can see it in something like aesthetics. So if aesthetics trains us how to be humans, then we've gone wrong. And you can still find people that write for things like, you know, the Chronicle of Higher Education that say that, you know, the problem with kids these days is that they haven't been trained to listen to Wagner and realize the beauty of whatever symphony, Wagner, I think that in this case it was Tristan and Isolde. Okay, so, you know, without thinking that, you know, that there was a complicated history that went through the training of the body to appreciate the aesthetics of someone like Wagner. I think this is one of the reasons why I like etymology so much. I think, you know, education means a leading, and to train is to discipline, to educate is to allow an open kind of leading that aesthetics comes from the Greek word for palpable things. If we can be attentive to a world of palpable things, where possibilities are more open than foreclosed, and the objective isn't to train us to be you know, well-regulated citizens who appreciate the beauty of the state, but rather to have more dissonant possibilities, then I'm all for education and aesthetics, but in a way that's been revisited so that you know, the future is not so diminished, sexist, conformist, all of those things that I think posthumanism argues so strenuously against. Right? The problem for posthumanism, the problem with the human, is that it's a disciplinary device, and it leads to the regulation of so much dissonance and conformity. So.
Thank you. I know there are lots more questions, and so I feel really, really mean not to call on anyone else. But coffee is served outside, and then the first set of panels will begin. So please look on your program to check the rooms for the next set of meetings this morning. But first, let us thank Professor Cohen again for
thank you.